They confuse difficult with impossible. See, there's nothing too difficult for God to do. But some things are impossible because they don't mean anything. You could say of a man, can a man pick up a car? Is it impossible? No, it's difficult. Very difficult. It's difficult because of the limitations that the man has. But it's not entirely out of the question that a man couldn't pick up and tip a car over by himself. Now, when you're talking about deity, you talk about God, there's nothing too difficult. That is, something too heavy, he can't pick it up or whatever. But some things are impossible because they don't mean anything when you say them. What does it mean when I say a square circle? What is a square circle? Well, there's no such thing, and God can't make a circle square. Because if it's square, it has corners, and it's not a circle anymore. If it's a circle, it doesn't have corners. They're just words that you string together. It's the kind of thing that careful people have been aware of for centuries, that there's no end to the words that we can string together, put one after the other. That doesn't mean they make any sense. Something has to have a meaning before you say, is it possible or not? If you don't understand that, this is where people can lead you anywhere they like. And I have to wonder, what is the Quran for anyway? The Quran talks about the things that cannot be so. It tells you why they can't be so. It gives you arguments to use. It says when somebody says this, you tell him that. This is the reason that can't be so. It tells you, as an example, like I used the other night, one surah starts off by telling us, as an oath, it says, by the even and the odd. It's reminding us that even and odd are different things. And you'll never find something that's both. If it's odd, that means it isn't even. That's what odd means. It means it isn't even. If I tell you I have about an odd number, I mean you can't divide it by 2. And nobody can make it work because of what the words mean. You see, where that usually comes back, or where people try to use that, is the Muslim may take all of these wonderful arguments in the Quran, and he may give them to somebody who says, for example, that God is 3. And he says, look, it can't be so because of this and this and this. All Quranic arguments. God cannot be 1 and at the same time 3 because of these reasons. And the man says, your God is too weak. My God can do anything. He can be 3 if he wants to. Do you know that kind of argument demolishes itself in this way? If a man says to you, God is 3, you ask him why is he 3? He'll tell you that's his nature. That's the way he is. Always been 3. That's the way he is. And when you try to explain, well, how can something be 3 and yet 1 and 3 and so on, then you say, because God can do anything. Well, think about it. If he can do anything, then he didn't have to be 3. He could have been 1 or 5 or 7 or whatever. Or he could be 11 tomorrow and 12 the next day and start over again the day after that. If he can do anything, which means it isn't his nature. That's not the way he has to be. It's the way he decided to be, which is different than what he started off telling you. He started by telling you his nature is 3. He finishes by telling you he decided to be 3. Well, which is it? The attitude, as I say, of confusing what's difficult and what's impossible lets people get away with anything. It's what puts a stop to any kind of a reasonable discussion that you can have. There are people who will tell you, my God at one time was a little boy and went to school and learned things. So your God learned things? Well, no, he knew everything. He's God. Well, then what did he learn? Well, he had to go to school. He learned things. Round and round they go. Because of a passage they have in their scriptures that speaks of this one they say was God. Because when he was 12 years old, he went back with his parents and learned. He grew in knowledge. They'll tell you, yes, well, God did that. He learned some things. And when you say, but what was it God didn't know that he learned? Oh, nothing. He knew everything. And round and round. That's why some people wrap up all those ideas and they put it in one phrase. And because they can string words together, it sounds like maybe they solved the problem. I tell you, all theology is paradox. Paradox is a thing that seems to contradict itself. In fact, it comes from two words that mean to speak against, speak back against. So to tell you, well, science works like this, it makes good sense, and so does everything else. But when we come to the study of God, it doesn't make sense. That's what makes it theology. You see, everything else makes sense. You talk about God, no, that doesn't make sense. That's different. All theology is paradox. As one man who's regarded as being a very saintly individual by a lot of people, he said 17 centuries ago, the reason I believe it is because it's absurd. Silly. Because it is absurd, therefore I believe it. The problem with that, of course, is that if what you're supposed to believe is absurd, how do you decide which is the silly thing you're supposed to believe? See, there's a lot of absurd things that contradict each other. The truth is one kind of a thing. It's only one version. There's a lot of things in conflict that are false. How do you decide which crazy thing is the true one? If you can't use your mind to decide between true and false. That's part of the good news of the Quran, the good news of this message. It tells mankind, trust yourself to know. In effect, it's saying, you will recognize truth when your mind is switched on, not when it's switched off. Telling you want to find out what you need to know, you'll find it when your mind is on, not off. Doesn't mean we don't all make mistakes. But what we do know for sure is we don't find it with the mind switched off. So, by way of maybe some advice, I'll try to suggest that that attitude should grow in a person so that he gains some confidence, so that he's not frightened by what somebody else might say to him. He doesn't get scared by the big vocabulary somebody has, or which school did he go to, and so on. I know many examples of people who thought they knew something, and it was the humblest sort of a person by his appearance who just blew him away. A friend of mine was telling me how years ago, he's from Sudan, and he said there was a man, he'd gathered quite a crowd around him, and they were all silently listening to him talk about the wonderful way that one political system is supposed to work, and they thought he must know what he's talking about. He's got all these credentials and all these letters after his name. And the whole point of his speech was to say that in this system, everybody is at exactly the same level. See, there are no leaders. Everybody's exactly the same. That's how it works best. And while he's telling the crowd this, a farmer came by pushing his little vegetable cart, and he stopped and he listened for a bit. What's this man saying? Nobody else has got the nerve to speak, and this man put up his hand. So the man looked at him and said, "You had a question?" He said, "No, I want to ask you, have you ever looked at the fingers on your hand? See, are they all the same length? See, they're all different lengths. That's why it works better. If the fingers are all the same length, it wouldn't work as well." And just that quickly, he showed the man that maybe you ought to think again about a political system where there are no generals and no presidents and no leaders or anything. Everybody's at the same level. Will it work? Your hand wouldn't work if your fingers were like that. If your head is clear, it doesn't matter who you're talking to. You don't lose arguments because of what you don't know. If your head is clear, you can take whatever is told to you and give it back and use it. Don't be frightened. Maybe the challenge is not in talking to people about religion, unless you're trying to defend your own view. Sometimes people think they've got a